All right, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us. We'll give it a few more minutes to let some last minute folks hop on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so I'll just go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone who's able to hop on today for today's webinar, which is eeGuidance for Equitable Pay and Hiring. And yeah, we're so excited to have you here today. And if you all are not familiar with CAE, our mission is to advance environmental education in Colorado by fostering collaboration, mobilizing support, and driving excellence. One CAE member reaches 900 learners, and our 850 CAE members reach about 800,000 learners across the state. And yeah, we have a lot of exciting upcoming events in the new year, so mark your calendars for that. January 22nd is the start of our spring EE courses, and we have a lot of great courses that I will be running in the spring, so check out our website for that. Our next webinar will be on January 25th, and it is Empowering Impact, the Grounding in Research and Data Toolkit webinar, so it's all about evaluation. February 7th is the kickoff for our EE Teaching Practices cohort. April 12th is our spring conference, which will be in Breckenridge, which is really exciting. And then all the way in September, September 19th and 20th will be our annual Advancing EE conference, which will be a lot of fun. And then I know we're all very familiar with Zoom by now, but just a quick few reminders to please keep your line muted while others are speaking. If you want to chat anything, use the chat function to send a message to either presenters or staff or any other participants. And if you would like to, you can chat in your name, organization, or where you're connecting from. And just as a reminder, you will be receiving the recording from today. And that's all I have. So I'm going to pass it over to Katie.
Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. It's great to see you all. And I'm excited to talk about this topic. I think over the last year or so, when I've been talking to folks around the state about what their biggest challenges are, hiring and recruitment is one of the biggest ones that has been people have been talking about. And so this is one tool to help us navigate those challenges. And hopefully we'll dig in today and see how we can use this, what's in it, and how we can think about equitable pay and hiring in environmental education. So I'm going to ask you to just think for a minute about what was your pathway to environmental education. And you might think about what was your first job in environmental education? What did you need to be able to get that job? Or what did you have to do to be able to grow your career? I'm going to give you just 30 seconds to think about that individually. And then thinking about what you remembered about your first job and these questions that we asked. We want you to think about it in terms of who might be excluded from that same job or opportunity. Why would they be excluded? When or how would they be excluded from that opportunity? And we're going to put you into breakout groups just for about 5 minutes. You can talk about your first experience in EE. And if you think everyone would have access to that opportunity who was looking for opportunities in environmental education. So, Brianna, if you would go ahead and put folks into groups of 2 to 3, that would be great. And we'll take about 5 minutes. Welcome back. Well, we have just a few more folks coming. All right. I think we have everyone back. Is there anything that anyone would be willing to share if they talked about a first job that might have resulted in excluding folks from being eligible for that opportunity?
I mean, I can share, I guess. I have had quite a few jobs that would have excluded people. A lot of the seasonal jobs that I had when I first started um, didn't really provide a salary that was a living wage in any sense of the word. But a lot of them did provide housing, which I think was what made it possible. And just living very frugally. I think I ate a lot of canned soup and ramen for a good like 10 years there.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll concur. One of my first jobs was at a residential environmental education facility. Also, they provided housing and some food with that. But our salary was $300 a month. And you had to live on site for that position, which also would have excluded folks. I think we all probably have lots of examples within our career of, for some people, that's not possible. Maybe the seasonal nature isn't possible. Maybe the having to move or live in a specific location isn't possible. Maybe the pay for that job isn't possible. And so it's worth really thinking about how do we put into place something that opens up more opportunities. Now, we know that for some opportunities, there are restrictions, and not every job will be able to include everyone. However, we want to think about how to open as many doors as we possibly can. So the eGuidance for Equitable Pay and Hiring, just to give you a little background about what sparked this project. And Brianna, if you wouldn't mind putting the link to the full document in the chat, that would be great. In 2021, the Southeastern Environmental Education Alliance did a landscape analysis across 8 states. And what they found was that the average entry level salary for environmental educators is 15 to 25% lower than looking at entry level salaries for forestry, tourism, and education. They also found that only 7% of environmental education staff and 6.5% of senior staff identified as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And so really thinking about how could we help, or how could they help organizations think about how to get more equitable pay and be able to recruit staff that reflected the communities that they serve. They developed this eeGuidance for Equitable Pay and Hiring. So today we'll talk a little bit about what's in the guidance, what are some recommendations, and then I'll give you an example of an organization in Maine that I think is doing some really innovative things and is a great example of kind of where they took this guidance. So, as I said, this was created by the Southeastern Environmental Education Alliance, and there was a team of 6 writers and then 22 advisors representing a wide range of experiences, roles, identities, expertise, and geographies that all helped support the writing of this document. It's now been endorsed by quite a few organizations. My guess is this slide is also probably already out of date. In addition to, we have endorsed it at CAEE. You'll notice the Association of Nature Center Administrators, the North American Association of Environmental Education, and the Association for Experiential Education have all endorsed the guidelines that are in this document. So why should we be thinking about this? We want to be more in line with comparable fields as the field of environmental education. We want to make sure we're improving employee retention and reducing turnover. Turnover is hard. Transitions are hard. So how do we keep employees for longer? We want to improve the program experiences for students, and that means that our staff and the people leading programs will represent the communities that they serve, and that when they're more satisfied in their job, they're going to do better programming. And we want to establish our field as a viable profession. We want people to feel like they can get into the field and stay in the field. So the guidance and resources are broken into 4 big buckets. There's guidance around pay and benefits, around designing positions, around recruitment, and then hiring processes and practices. We're going to go kind of through a overarching overview, but in the guidance document itself, for each of those sections, it dives in a lot deeper to each of those different categories and gives more information about really thinking about what those standards mean. For each area, there's a set of minimum and target standards that we can be thinking about. What's kind of the baseline that we want to be working towards, and what's above and beyond, but where we really want to be when we think about target standards. And I will say, we recognize and acknowledge that none of this is going to happen tomorrow. We know, especially when we're talking about pay and benefits, that the expenses of salaries are increasing much more quickly than funding is increasing. But this gives us a baseline and a place to start working towards, some background, some detail to think about what are the things we can do today and what are the things that we need to work towards. So don't feel like you need to make these things all happen right away. We know this is a process. In terms of what's included in the guidance, there's researched explanations for the why for every topic. There's links to additional resources. And as we said, there's minimum and target standards. What the guidance is not is an enforceable or set of requirements. Nobody's required to do this. There's no penalties if you're not meeting these expectations. They're really to help provide a tool to give us something to work towards. They're not narrowly applicable and short-sighted. So we want to think about these, again, future-oriented. How can we work towards this over time? They're also not universal and timeless. These guidelines will change. Different laws will come into effect. Context will change, and we'll need to go back in and revisit these. They're also not backed up only by published resources. There's some lived experience included in there, and really thinking about lived experience and building the context for this. And this is not a band-aid for addressing equity in the workplace. There's lots of different areas where we can work on equity in environmental and outdoor learning. This is just one area. Any questions so far about what the guidance is before we dive in? And Brianna, if you see anything in the chat, please shout it out for me. Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and dive into the guidance. And as we go through the different target standards and minimum standards, Brianna, I'll ask you to just pop that handout in the chat for everyone. you can do one of two things. There's a handout that lists the guidance, and then it has a column for you to write notes to do a self-assessment. You can use that handout, or you might just want to grab a piece of paper and jot down notes of the things that jump out to you, the things that you want to work on. But keep some notes about what you want to work on. At the very end, we'll get back into groups and just have a few minutes to chat about where do you see the most needs at your organization, and how do you want to work on that. So let's talk a little bit about guidance around pay inequity. One of the things that we see often is, and I know I have done this, is when we're looking at salaries, we benchmark against organizations that are like us. And we look at, well, what are you paying? What is the nonprofit sector paying? But when we only look at organizations that are also probably underpaying folks, that exacerbates the problem and keeps it going. And so really thinking about where do we get our data and how do we get data to benchmark positions against is a big thing to think about. There's a report called The Privilege of Low Pay. It's all about informal educators' perspectives on workforce equity and diversity, and 70% of respondents said they would be unable to sustain their career in informal education without additional support. That's a pretty big number. So what are some of the standards? Probably one of the biggest ones to look at is paying a living wage for entry-level positions. A minimum standard is basing that on a single individual household. And you want to adjust that frequently as living wage changes. So that's something to look at every year, every couple of years. What we want to look at as a target standard is building a thriving wage for positions. Now, that's a little complicated because there is no clear definition of what a thriving wage is. There's lots of different ways to calculate that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we want to think about, if we have part-time positions, we might want to offer a higher wage for those, especially if they're not designed to allow additional employment. And really thinking about who we benchmark positions against. So just looking a little bit, and I know there's a lot of numbers on this page, but I just wanted to give you some examples of where for Colorado you can look for data on wages. There's a couple different places. And just for reference, the minimum wage federally is only $7.25 an hour. And in Colorado, it's $13.65 an hour. In Denver, it's higher, it's $17.29 an hour. But so that gives you an idea of what the minimum wage is. Living wage, the best place to find that is the MIT Living Wage Calculator. And again, the minimum standards are to calculate that for one person with no children. And for Colorado, that comes out to a living wage is at $19.22 an hour. So just under $40,000 a year annually. There is also a couple other sources that you can look at if you are looking at what a thriving wage is. Go Banking Rates calculates a thriving wage. And I will share out the slides to this so you have all these links. But that, in addition to what a living wage would provide, that builds in, what does it cost to save for retirement? What does it cost to have some funding for leisure activities? So you can see we jump all the way from $19.22 to $28 an hour. There's also the Bureau of Labor Statistics median hourly rate wage. And you can look up all kinds of statistics there. But in the middle, for an education-based salary, and you can look at different industries, we kind of cross several industries. So I just pulled out one here. But they put that at $27.74 an hour as kind of the median wage. And then when people look at thriving wage, they sometimes use the MIT living wage calculator and add 50%. So that jumps up to $28.83 an hour if you stay at one person with 0 children. But if you add 1 child, that jumps up to $40.21 an hour. And then there's also the NLIHC housing wage, which calculates how much you would need in order to get a 2-bedroom rental apartment. And that for Colorado is $32.13 an hour. So that gives you just a little bit of a sense of what some of the numbers are and where you can pull them from. And like I said, a thriving wage, there is no standard for what we look at there. So there's a little bit of subjectivity in terms of how you calculate that and where you calculate it, but there are different models to look at if you are thinking about that in your organization. And it might be that you're just working towards getting to a living wage, and that's okay too. I think every step towards more equitable pay and hiring is a good step. What are some other recommendations around pay and benefits? Eliminating unpaid internships is the big one. We want to think about making internships accessible to people who might need to get paid for those. And so really thinking about how do we offer, if we jump up into those target standards, how do we offer well-paying entry-level positions with the potential for advancement? Another recommendation that came out of the report is to really be thinking about additional perks and benefits. And that's going to vary across organizations. And I have seen a lot of organizations looking for creative ways to provide benefits. And those might look very different in different places. And for different people, different benefits are going to be more desirable. So really interesting to think about how to make sure that we're providing benefits. When we think about target standards where we want to move, we want those benefits to include healthcare, paid leave, and retirement. And how do we think about including both part-time, entry-level, and seasonal positions in getting those benefits too? Another recommendation is if you do provide room and board, to make sure that that is less than 50% of the total compensation package, so that that's not kind of overriding any sort of pay that they're getting on top of that. And really thinking about eliminating stipend-based positions so that staff are compensated for hours worked, including on-call time, which I know can be very challenging. So that's a few of the recommendations that go into pay and benefits. The next big bucket is around designing positions and really thinking about what goes into that position description and what goes into that role. A couple of the guidance around that is just making sure that you're listing salary and hiring ranges in all job postings. And that is actually legally required in Colorado. We have to do that. So all of us should be already meeting the minimum standards there, which is great. And then in terms of target standards, really thinking about how we provide a transparent compensation framework for all positions within your organization. So do staff know how the salary is calculated? Do they know why the numbers are the way they are? What is that framework and how can we be transparent and clear about it? Writing job descriptions that include inclusive language and that emphasize knowledge, skills, qualities, and abilities needed to do the job. We want to think about making sure that those skills are actually required. So I know one of the holdovers that we still continue to see on a lot of position descriptions is that you're able to lift 50 pounds. Do you really need to lift 50 pounds? Is that an absolute requirement? And if we took that out, would that open up the door to more folks? And then thinking about how we can build in internal training and onboarding experiences to help folks that might not meet the requirements initially develop those as part on the job. We want to think about pay bands for interns, seasonal and permanent positions that are appropriate to the length of their term and expected level of independence and expertise, and what is appropriate to expect from interns or seasonal staff versus a permanent position. In terms of target standards, we want to really think about how to move more of our staff into permanent positions, which is a challenge. We are a field that relies a lot on seasonal positions, but those can be very challenging and they can be a barrier for a lot of folks trying to enter the field. So how do we slowly move over to incorporating more permanent positions? And offering specialization on our teams in terms of the skills that are involved in those positions. When we think about recruitment, that's a huge part of thinking about equity and inclusion in our work. Some of the minimum standards that were identified were to be really intentional about where positions are posted, and posting in non-traditional places. We want to make really intentional decisions about internal and external recruiting. And this is always a challenge. We don't always know where to post, but that's something I think having conversations in the network about looking to other organizations to get ideas will be really important. In terms of target standards, really thinking about how do we build relationships before we're hiring with minority serving institutions and community organizers in diverse communities, and really creating a strong, healthy relationship before we need to hire so that they can feel more confident in recommending us as employers. When we think about hiring practices and processes, a couple of the standards that were identified, we're really thinking about timing of interviews and making sure we provide a range of interview times that folks can participate in that. Making sure we provide contact information on job postings and just being really transparent about the hiring process, what the expectations are. Thinking about collecting specific information from candidates during the application phase so that they're set up for success in what to tell you and what to look for. So it may be instead of just a resume and cover letter, there's specific questions they answer so that they're set up for success. In terms of target standards, we can actually add information about the hiring process to the job description. We can make sure we offer both in-person and virtual interview options, and we can share interview bios in advance so that they know who they're going to be talking to when they go into an interview. The recommendation really is to build a hiring committee for every hire, and provide training for this team around bias, and making sure that all voices on that team are considered throughout the process. For target standards, really thinking about including external advisors on those hiring teams. Are there folks that work with your organization a lot that might be really good to bring in? Are there constituents that you might want to bring in? And then making sure if you do add external advisors that they get compensation for their time for participating in that. Another thing to think about is, are we asking uniform questions, and do we have a uniform way to evaluate the answers for all candidates so that everybody's going through the same process, and that those interviews are scheduled so that all candidates can be assessed with the same attention. We want to make sure that we're always leaving time for candidates to ask questions and that we're never asking about previous salary history. In terms of target standards, think about sharing those interview questions in advance to set them up for success so they're best prepared to answer those questions. Using skills assessment instead of theoretical interview questions. And then this is one I never thought about before, making reference checks a two-way relationship and providing references about your organization that they can reach out to and talk to. Another recommendation is to really just be thoughtful about the time required for candidates and hiring committees and making sure that we're never asking candidates to create custom work without paying them for it. So if you're asking folks to develop a lesson or anything like that, if we're doing that, we need to be providing compensation for that time. And then make sure we're providing feedback as well in terms of why a candidate is not selected. Target standards, really just thinking about how do we coach candidates through the process. And if we are asking for that custom work, how do we provide compensation for that? Another guideline is to, after a hiring process, evaluate how that process went so that we can continue to modify job postings, recruitment strategies, and hiring strategies to reduce barriers. As target standards, we should probably be conducting exit and stay interviews to understand our workplace culture and our organizational practices better so that we can identify areas that we might want to work on. So that's a lot. I just threw a lot of information at you. And like I said, this doesn't dig into the details. There's still pretty high level guidance. So hopefully as you were going through, there was a couple that you either noted that you're interested in working on, or maybe something that you're doing really, really well and can share what's working for you. So we're going to get into groups again for another 5 minutes and just have a chance to talk. What jumped out to you? What's something you're interested in working on? Is there something you're doing that works really well and that you're proud of? What steps do we need to take to start working towards some of these things? So Brianna, I'll ask you to put people in groups of 2 or 3 and we'll have a chance to talk for about 5 minutes. All right, welcome back. Was there anyone who had a successful strategy that you'd be willing to share with the group?
I mean, I'll jump in. I feel like this didn't work out well for me like this in my last position, but I do feel like if we are going to implement these more equitable hiring practices, that leaders need to accept that managers need more time, because it does take more time to research places to post it in more places. You're probably going to get more applicants, so you're going to have to screen through all those applicants. And so just making sure that the time allowed for hiring meets the need for the the time required for hiring in this way.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if that's kind of more of a suggestion than like a success that I've had, but
that's a really good point. Absolutely. Any other suggestions or successes?
I can share something that I recently implemented. I was noticing that it was like, here's the job description, now post it. And it was like a little chaotic in that way, because like we didn't think through all of the steps after we post it. So I kind of made like a template of like, what's our timeline, who's on vacation, who's interviewing. And I kind of like am now requiring that to be like a conversation before I even will post the job. So then like we all are on the same page before it even goes out. And that's been feeling good.
That's a really great idea. Thanks for sharing that. All right. Well, feel free to add more either suggestions or things that have been working well in the chat. I think it's really important that we share successes, no matter how big or small they are. Small steps can be really transformational. And so really important to remember that too. So what do we hope people will do with this document? And kind of where can you go from here? What can you be thinking about? For sure, we'd love you to reference this when designing and posting positions. We'd love you to use it as a tool to advocate to your leaders or whoever in your organization might need support in thinking about increasing EE salaries and seeking additional funding to do that. You can even share this with job seekers or folks who are in entry level positions and so that they have a better, more transparent idea of things that they can expect. And at the systems level, if you want to endorse this document, you can do that as well. As you are creating job descriptions, if you meet or exceed the minimum standards, you can actually copy and paste this language that this position meets or exceeds the recommendations as outlined in the guidance. And you can actually share that on your job description to promote that you're meeting or exceeding these guidelines. So I wanted to give one example of an organization that's really working on creating a transparent compensation framework. And this is something that I would say is going into the target level. But it's really interesting to think about, like, what would this look like in an organization? So they went through the process of thinking about how do we make the compensation transparent. They worked with an organization called Blue Swallow and Vigamala Consulting in order to do this. And it was a $10,000 project that they hired a consultant for. And what they did through that process was they reviewed their current compensation practices, documents, key staff information. All the staff and board did in-depth interviews and surveys, and they explored what are some organization-specific factors for assessing equitable pay? And then they drafted this values-based framework to be really transparent about how they're developing compensation levels. So what did that look like? And here you can see the analysis they did for Maine. In terms of a living wage, it ranges from anywhere from 42,000 all the way up to, if you've got one person and one child plus 50%, all the way up to 108,000 was kind of the range of what a living wage to a thriving wage looked like when they pulled the numbers. They did interviews with their staff, and they asked them, how well would you say you understand how salaries are determined? To what degree would you say that Mia's pay and benefits are aligned with our values? And how satisfied are you with overall compensation at Mia? And so they got a lot of data back and were able to more fully understand the picture of where folks were at and what they were thinking about the pay they were receiving. And so they developed, based on that feedback, they were able to develop a formula where they set a base rate. For them, it was 50,000. For a different organization, it might be a different base rate. If you're full-time, you're going to hit this threshold. And then anything above that threshold is going to run through a formula. They built in a constant cost of living increase. Theirs was $1,500 per year. They committed to not doing any negotiations for raises. They were strictly going to use the formula. And they committed to having a max 1-to-2 wage ratio. So the highest paid person can't make more than 2 times the lowest paid person. And so they developed then this matrix where different levels of leadership and different responsibilities added to your pay. So if the base rate was at 50,000 and you had programmatic leadership at level 1, so you were responsible for leading or co-leading at least one core programmatic function, then $1,000 would be added. If you were in level 2, then $2,000 would be added. And they had categories for all of the things that might add to someone's salary: programmatic leadership, operational leadership, resource development. And then also included was lived experience. So if you had lived experience with a community that they serve that is adversely affected, then that would constitute additional salary. Relevant professional experience was on the matrix. What responsibilities you had for Jedi work within the organizations. If you had liability and risk management responsibility, management of staff, and organizational leadership. And so they were able to line it out so that it was really clear, this is how we got to your salary number. And again, this is just one example of one organization. There are lots of different ways that organizations might deploy putting together a framework for how compensation works. But that one's a cool one that I think is interesting to think about. And whatever your next step is depends on where you're starting from and what your sphere of influence is within your organization. You might just be sharing this document with the rest of your organization. You might have some budgeting power and be able to think about it there. Your next step might be very different based on the organization where you're at. So again, you can find the full document at the link that Brianna pasted in the chat, and I'll ask you to paste it one more time, Brianna, just so folks can easily grab it. But hopefully this gave you a little bit of a taste of what's in the guidance document and how you can use it. We have about 3 minutes left. Are there any questions or comments folks have?
Just want to say thank you, Katie, for hosting this. It was really informative.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming.
Can chime in. I think it was very helpful that it's broken down into kind of smaller steps and then bigger goals. Because I know I have been thinking about these sort of things in our hiring process, and it has felt very overwhelming, and it's nice to be, I guess, given permission to start small.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that observation. I think, yeah, it's important to think about there are things we can do tomorrow, and there are things we might be able to do next year, or things that we're working towards in the future. So I absolutely 100% agree that any step is a good step forward, and we're all working to get there.
I have a question. I'm wondering if anybody knows of a person or a business or an organization that helps with recruiting and hiring and training in like our field of environmental education. Like, is this something that an organization could not outsource completely, but just like in times of need, like hire an outside help with these kinds of tasks?
I will say I don't know of anyone in Colorado. There is an organization, and I'm going to forget the name of it, but there is a network of HR professionals who are dedicated to equity in HR. And so there are folks all over the country that are part of this group and having these types of conversations. And I'm sure that there are some that offer different services. The Blue Swallow Consulting and the Vigamala Consulting would be ones that I would look into. They're not Colorado based, but I know they've done work with environmental education organizations, and would be someone who, if they couldn't do the work, would be good at directing you to folks that could. I will say I reached out to this network looking for a speaker last year, and they were so fabulous about pinging me. I think I talked to like 6 different people who all pointed me to different people. So they're really good about getting you to where you need to go. Awesome. Well, I know we are right at time here, so I just want to thank everybody for coming, because that means you're thinking about this, and that's definitely the first step in the right direction, and making it a priority. So thank you for being here and for all your thoughtful consideration today. And please reach out and let us know where you continue to struggle, and what other conversations you want to have around this, because I think it's always valuable to bring folks together. But I hope you have a great rest of the year. And if I don't talk to you, happy New Year.